Today, we're gonna be talking about my favorite discipline in road cycling, and that is time trials. This is also gonna apply to triathlons, which I've also done over the past few years. The video today is going to be about fitting a time trial or triathlon bike for larger athletes. Now, if you can't tell, I am what we'd like to call in the business a thick boy. And because of that, I've discovered there's some unique challenges when it comes to fitting on TT and triathlon bikes. And I'd like to kind of go over that for anyone out there who might be looking for information like this, because typically the videos that I've seen across the YouTube space at least may not be purposely geared this way, but they do tend to be geared more towards that traditional endurance athlete physique. And I think there's a lot of people out there who could benefit from something like this, where we talk about people in larger bodies who might be trying to fit on a TT or triathlon bike, or even just kind of adjusting their road bike for a aero bar setup. So we're gonna go over that today and all the specifics that kind of go into that. But first things first, roll the intro. It's a quick intro. So the first thing I want to go over is my experience / qualifications in this particular area. So first thing is, I've been cycling since I was a kid. I grew up in a competitive cycling family, and outside of that, I've been competing in cycling and triathlon for the past 2 or 3 years. And in that time, I've done a fair amount of bike fits, both for myself and for my friends who I was competing with. Now, on top of that, I have been a strength and conditioning coach for the past decade. I've been coaching different forms of fitness, whether it be Olympic weightlifting, CrossFit, or just general strength and conditioning for, like I said, the past 10 years. And I'd like to say that my experience there in terms of kind of understanding functionality when it comes to human movement is probably more of my benefactor than necessarily my experience in cycling and triathlon itself. So most of what I'm going to talk about here is kind of based in obviously my experience in cycling, but mostly on kind of my understanding of how the human body is supposed to move. Now, with that in mind, first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about the machine, which is the bike choice. Okay, now the first thing I wanna say in regards to bike frame choice is the same thing that I've said in past videos, and the same thing I will probably always say. Whatever bike you can afford and whatever bike you will actually ride is the right choice for you. Beyond that, it's all semantics. Outside of that, I'm assuming that most people out there have a bike that they're trying to fit on currently, and they're not necessarily on this video because they want advice on which bike to buy, right? I will make a small comment in regards to frame size, and that is, if you already have a road bike and you're looking to buy a TT or triathlon frame, the same frame size is probably gonna be a good choice. Outside of that, most websites and bike sellers and bike resellers like the Pros Closet, so on and so forth, will have a sizing chart that will get you relatively close. Now, I will say there's some small caveats in there depending on how you're kind of anatomically shaped. So for me, as an example, I ride a size small on most road bike frames, so 50, 51, 52 centimeters. Typically 53 centimeter top tube is kind of like the longest that I can ride. But on a TT bike, I ride medium. So I ride 54, 55 centimeters. The reason for that is I have relatively short legs and a comparably longer torso. So because of the position on the TT bike in that you're hinged further over, your torso length is going to make a bigger difference on how you interact with the reach of the bike than it would on a road bike. So that is a small caveat that I will say that you might have to consider. If you have a long torso, you might have to go a size up if you feel like it's necessary, right? And using a road bike as kind of like a starting or judgment point can be a good place to kind of figure out whether you need to go up a size or not. The inverse, however, is not as true. So if you have a shorter torso and longer legs, more than likely the same size of your road bike frame is going to be okay for your TT or triathlon bike. Now, one last little note before we get into the specifics here. When you're fitting on a TT bike for the first time, the goal should not be to get as aero and as low as possible. You should be fitting for comfort first. If you're not comfortable on the bike, you will not be able to hold your position for a very long duration, and you likely won't be able to put the power out because of it. So because of that, we are going to aim to be comfortable in that time trial position first. From there, we can maybe over time slowly start to get lower and lower as our strength in that position starts to increase. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, first thing, let's talk about the saddle. The saddle is kind of the first place that I would like to start, mainly because this is where most of your interaction with the bike is going to be. And if anything's wrong here, everything else is going to be wrong at the front of the bike. So we're going to start here. Now, if you have a road bike, like I was saying, that you can start with, use that saddle height as a starting point on your time trial bike. One of the big things to note is your interaction with the saddle is going to be a little bit different, but in terms of height and your reach to the pedals, it's likely not going to be that much different. So start with your road bike height in terms of measuring from the middle of the bottom bracket up to the top of the saddle. And then from there, you can maybe make any adjustments that you might need. If you don't have a road bike to start from, it is much more advantageous to start lower than you think. So start with a relatively low saddle and then gradually bring the saddle up until likely you've gone too high, and then you can kind of back your way down. Now, when your saddle's too low, it's going to be painfully obvious in a lot of ways, but one of the things you want to watch out for is you can be 1 or 2 centimeters too low if you're having a very particular event happen. And this is something that I noticed with myself. Because I have big thighs and a big torso, my original saddle position from my road bike would cause my thigh to hit my stomach and it would bump me off the saddle. So every time I would hit the top of the stroke, I would bump myself just slightly off the saddle on both sides. So because of that, I kind of knew that my saddle was just a little bit too low and I would just have to bring it up 1 or 2 centimeters until I found that good position. Now, bike fitting in general is more of a game of centimeters than millimeters. The human body is really good at absorbing dysfunction, and we are unfortunately naturally kind of imbalanced creatures. So with that in mind, just kind of know that going up 2 mil, 3 mil at a time, you're not really gonna notice. So 1 to 2 centimeters up and up until you feel like you can't reach the pedals. If your saddle's too high, you'll know that because you'll have this snapping through the bottom of the stroke. So what that is as your foot passes through the bottom of the pedal stroke, you'll dip your toe down and there will be a faster whip through the bottom 25 to 50% of the pedal stroke than at the top. So if there's a change in speed at any point that you can feel, or you feel your toe dipping down at the bottom, your saddle's too high. Okay, from there, back it back down until you're comfortable on the saddle and you have a nice smooth pedal stroke. So now I want to, oh, you moved. So the next thing I want to talk about is saddle setback, or how the saddle sits fore and aft on the seat post here. So saddle height is the kind of the biggest variable that you're going to play with in terms of your interaction with the entire bike. But the saddle fore aft position is also really important in terms of how you're going to interact with the pedals and the front of the bike. As an example, if you set your saddle too far back, you are increasing your reach to the cockpit. What this is most likely going to do is going to adjust your pelvic position into being more posteriorly rotated. What that means is your pelvis is going to be rotating down here. You're going to have more lumbar curve, right? And it's just going to lead to a lot of discomfort on the bike, along with you at the front of the bike are naturally going to be more stretched out, and you're going to be more prone to rolling your shoulders in, and you're going to be putting a lot of pressure on the front of your delt here because you're kind of rolling that ball joint forward, and it's going to get really uncomfortable for a long period of time. So just know that as you're setting your saddle setback, if you go back and you start to feel that pelvic position start to roll under, it's too far back. Now the opposite isn't as easy to kind of diagnose in terms of visual reference. So if the saddle is too far forward, you really won't see too much difference in terms of your pelvic and lumbar position. However, you will start to feel a lot of pressure in the front of the bike because you're naturally throwing your weight super far forward, and the only place that you can absorb that is through your elbows or forearms, okay? So if you're feeling a lot of pressure at the front of the bike, it could be worth looking at your saddle position in terms of fore aft and seeing if it's a little too far forward. Now, small caveat, this can also be true if your saddle is too high or too far back. The way I've kind of noticed to diagnose that is more on your position on the saddle in terms of your interaction. So if you feel like you're not really touching much of the saddle, being most of your weight is sat kind of here or forward, right? It's likely that your saddle is too far back or too high. Because what's happening is, because of the saddle position, you're likely to stretch out, okay? And because of this, you're really unconsciously shifting forward on the saddle, which once again is throwing your weight forward onto the front of the bike. If any of that is happening, check your saddle fore aft position, make some adjustments until you feel a nice even distribution of pressure, okay? We wanna be evenly distributed here as we are here. Now here's the last thing I'll say in regards to saddle position. Do not tilt the saddle just because you saw a pro triathlete do it. Just because Magnus Ditlev or Joe Skipper or whoever tilt their saddle forward to get into their position doesn't mean you should too. People like that, the pros, once again, they are not built like us. They are demonstrably smaller, but also more powerful. So what that means is the more power they put through the pedals, the less pressure they're feeling in these contact points. So just because they do it doesn't mean it's applicable for us normal people. All right, let's talk about the front of the bike. Now, in terms of a starting point, because your interaction here can potentially have a small impact on your interaction with the saddle, I like to start with the pads, the elbow pads or the height of the risers being level with the saddle. It's gonna feel super relaxed to start, but that's okay. When you're working at the front of the bike here, we wanna start, once again, looking for comfort, and then we can slowly move ourselves down into a more aggressive position. So as you're starting here with those risers or elbow pads nice and level with the saddle, in terms of the width of the elbow pads and the length of the extensions, we wanna aim for elbows directly under shoulders. So elbow should kind of sit directly under the line of the shoulder, and then the width of the elbow, once again, is gonna be dictated by how comfortable you are here. The more narrow you get, the more compressed your chest cavity becomes, the harder it is to breathe. So start nice and wide, elbow right under that shoulder joint. And then the length of the extensions, the great thing about finding this is it's just the length of your forearm. Now, once we've got ourselves in this elbow under shoulder extension at the length of our forearm to the middle of our palm, we can start to play around with what feels good outside of this starting point. Now, our adjustments are gonna start from elbow pad position, extension position, and angle of our extensions as well. As you're adjusting, right, once again, we're aiming for comfort. It should be a position that you feel like you can hold for an extended duration of time, whether that's 20 to 60 minutes on a time trial, or for your triathlete, that 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 hour mark. Now, it will take time to get used to any positional adjustments, so try not to go too big, right? So don't make too aggressive of an adjustment, and then once you've got 30 minutes in, be like, oh, this doesn't work, okay? So you're gonna have to spend some time slowly working into specifically more aggressive positions and getting used to that over numerous training sessions. So just kind of know that it's gonna be hard to nail the position first time and hoorah, we're done. So just know that you're likely gonna make a bunch of small adjustments up here to find the perfect position over time rather than doing it all in one session. Now with that in mind, in terms of getting the extensions in the cockpit further away from you, right? All we're gonna do is however your elbow pads interact with the front of the bike, right? You're just gonna shift those a little bit forwards so that you have a good contact point that's comfortable for you anywhere on your forearm, right? Once again, it's gonna be up to you. Personally, I don't like having the very point of my elbow in my elbow pad. I kind of like this, bottom 20% and as much meat and bone on it that I can get. And this will probably be true with a lot of larger athletes as well, is the smaller the contact point, the more pressure that's gonna go through that specific point. So most of us are probably gonna like a larger surface area in contact with the elbow pad. From there, we can start to adjust the angle of the extensions if your bike has that capability. So this one, there's a lot of differing opinions on the internet. Once again, just find something that's comfortable. For me, too flat, I start to bring my chest up and I start to get a lot of tightness here through the front of my shoulder. But too high, I kind of roll my shoulder in and I get, once again, a lot of pressure through the front of the shoulder. So for me, somewhere in the middle is kind of where I've landed in terms of my position. And for you, it might be completely different, and that's okay. You just have to play around, find somewhere that feels comfortable, and then slowly settle in and make any small adjustments over time that feel better. Once you've got your elbow pad and your extension angle at a good position, the last two things you can start to adjust are height of the riser. So if you feel like you're still in too relaxed of a position, you can start to lower the height of the riser and bring yourself further down. But once again, as you start to go further down, you're gonna feel more compression in the front of your chest and it's gonna be harder to breathe. So slowly bring yourself down, potentially over a few training sessions, so that way you kind of know your limit point, and then it'll start to get better and better once you found that good spot. The very last note I wanna make here is always keep in mind how you interact with changing gears. Electronic shifting is gonna be a lot easier to do in terms of the TT setup here, but I've run two different types of mechanical shifting. I had old Shimano 105, and then I had a SRAM Red setup on this bike before I switched it over to electronic shifting. The thing I noticed was if the levers were too far away from me, it caused me to not have a ton of control of the bike as I was changing gears. So I initially kind of had myself set up here, right? And then as I reached to change gear, I would have this instability because I didn't have even pressure on the front of the bike. So I had to reduce the reach of the extensions based on where the gear levers were. So just kind of know that as you're doing things indoors, right? Riding outdoors to notice little things like that is also gonna make a big difference. So lots of small adjustments over time, riding indoors and outdoors to get yourself set is really important. Now, speaking of outdoors, the last thing I want to talk about is helmet and head position. So a lot of times what I see is people do this. So to get themselves into that nice low aero position, they push their head down. And what this does is this creates potentially some excessive curve in your cervical spine, but also it's just a lot of tension through the back of the neck and through your upper back and upper traps. Instead of that, right, we want to pull our shoulder blades together. So instead of dropping my head here, right, to get low, I want to pull my shoulder blades together and slightly pinch my shoulders up towards my ears. It's both, not one, right? So it's not just this, and it's not just this, right? I want to squeeze those shoulder blades together and slightly pinch my shoulders towards my ears, and that'll give me that nice narrow aero position that we're looking for. With that in mind, right, we want to make sure once again that in that position we are comfortable and we can see where we're going and we can control the bike. So as you're practicing getting into that aero position here, make sure you're riding outdoors and once again, slowly working your way into that position and making sure any adjustments that you need are made to control the bike as you're riding outside. Last couple of things is helmet choice and kind of keeping in mind other things like being able to drink water as you're riding. Helmet choice is a lot like saddle choice. It's gonna be very individual and based on access and kind of how much you're willing to spend on a helmet. Regardless, if you're choosing an aero helmet, it's likely got some type of tail on it. So when you're training, right, we wanna make sure we're not looking down all the time because this is not really gonna work well when you put your helmet on and ride outside. So make sure when you're training indoors, right, eyes up. And what that does is it's gonna get the tail of the helmet in line with our upper back and give us that nice seamless airflow from front to back of the bike. Also, you're gonna be able to see, right? Practice being able to see over your hands. Last thing is, as you're riding, whether it's for TTs or triathlon, you should kind of make a note to practice drinking water in your aero position if that's how you are hoping to ride and race. As you're training, right, we should be able to reach down, drink water, put back without causing any issues in the front of the bike. And then also, right, if you're riding with a computer, putting the computer in a place where you can see it without losing sight of the road for too long. A lot of people like to put their computers in between their arms because it's hidden from the air, but once again, you're not really saving much in terms of watts by hiding your computer. So just put it somewhere where you can see it as you're riding. Quick little check, back up. We're on track and we're staying safe out on the road. All right, so that kind of sums up all of my notes on fitting a T-tier triathlon bike, specifically for larger athletes. Things to remember, right? Fit for comfort first. If you're not comfortable, you're not gonna ride fast or ride well or enjoy riding. And the last thing is just making sure anything you work on indoors, you work on outdoors, so that way you are nice and safe when you ride. All right, that's all I gotta say. Thanks for watching, and stick around for the chaos. Never know what's next. Yeah.